joined by Coach Ron Stolski. Coach, tell us a little bit about your background in coaching.
Well, it's interesting. Brian, I grew up north of Minneapolis, and we played parkboard football. And as a youth, I played there. And my younger brother, who was 3 years younger than me, they had a parkboard team as well. But they needed to sign, once they signed the kids up, they needed to sign somebody's name on the bottom to coach. So they signed mine. And so I started coaching at age 13. And me and another kid, I guess we probably had a couple of parents. In any case, we won the city championship at 13. And I literally have been coaching most of my life. When I played in high school, I coached. A few years in college, I didn't, but other than that, that was the beginning.
Coach, how would you describe the culture of the programs that you've overseen in your career, including Brainerd? And then what are some of the values that you've tried to instill in your players?
Well, the cultures, culture is a word that's used fairly freely. It all depends where you are in one sense, at least the last 45 years of my career. When I started in a little tiny town, and frankly, there was no football culture. And we had good success there, and then we moved on, and then we moved on, and then we moved on. And I'd say this, we created a theme, we call it, in Brainerd we call it the Warrior Way, and it's based on compassion and care, and caring about one another, and having respect for yourself and for your teammates, for school, community, and so on. So I guess I would, if I had to, in a sentence or two, I'd say we have a culture of caring. And we have disciples that contact me often, especially after last season. And it's, Coach, I always knew you cared. And that's what we expected from our team, to care about one another, care about the game, but primarily care about being a good kid. And so I'd say it was a culture of care. Now, in terms of football, be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. When I was a young coach, I thought the best way to coach was just kick the doors down, and with a lot of fire and enthusiasm, and we could win. And then somewhere along the line, you realize you have to coach football too. And those two combinations has helped us along the way.
Now, Coach, when it comes to building a staff, what are some of the characteristics and values you look for in your assistant coaches?
I'll get right back to the culture I just talked about. I was fortunate. I was also, Brian, an athletic director for 24 years. I was fortunate to sit on the NIA triple board of directors nationally. I was fortunate to receive a number of awards, blah, blah, blah. But the first thing I look for in a coach is that he was a good teacher and that he cared about kids beyond the game itself. Then the second thing, of course, was a work ethic. I never wanted to hear from a coach, and as an AD, I hired coaches at every level in every sport. And I didn't want to hear, although it was natural enough, I really love to come to Brainerd because I like to fish or hunt or something like that. I wanted to know how they felt about the profession. When we choose a life in teaching or coaching, we choose to try to make a difference in the lives of the people we touch. And I wanted to make sure that who I interviewed had that, at least in their background. I want to make a difference, and not just as a football coach and coach winning football teams, but maybe in some ways I can influence kids. So that was the first thing. The second thing is I want to know about a work ethic. The good coach is turning the lights on in the morning and are the first to turn the lights on, and then the last to turn the lights off. I wanted a coach who would be committed to his craft. And third, I think professionals must never cease learning. I wanted coaches who were willing to go to clinics. Of course, today with the technology boom in the last 5, 6, 7 years, maybe there's too much information. But I wanted a coach wanted to be a professional in every way. And those three things, the rest I thought we could help teach one another. So those are the three things. First, you care about kids, care about your profession. Second, you really care about teaching. And third, you're a hard worker. That, as I said, you'll be there when the bell rings.
Coach, if you had to give advice for a first-time head coach who's inheriting a program, what would your most valuable piece of advice be?
If he's inheriting a program, is he the first-time coach, or is he been a coach on the staff and going to a program?
We'll go first-time head coach, first-time head coaching job.
Okay, first-time head coaching job, I say the first thing is learn as much as you can about the job that you're getting. Whether you are on that staff and just moving up, or whether you're moving from one school as maybe an assistant to being a header. Get a hold of the roster. Learn as much as you can about the kids as fast as you can. And secondly, I will refer to my answer earlier. You must be present. You must be the first one there in the morning. You must be the last to leave. You must walk through that locker room and talk to kids how to go today. You must put their arm around. Kids need to know that you care about them. They need to even, I've come to it over many years, kids got to like you. You don't have to be a buddy, never. I always say to my staff, don't be a buddy. Kids have got all kinds of buddies, but be a friend. And then be sure you either have a collection of plays or you have a philosophy as to how you want to field a team. And be sure that you coach what you know, not what somebody else knows, but you learn more about what you know or what you want to know along the way. And you do that through clinics and through mentors, through getting a hold of other coaches, and never be afraid to ask a question. But sit in the front row at clinics. Nothing can beat face-to-face interaction with our colleagues, because coaches, as you know, football coaches in particular, love to share. I've never been I'm a clinic guy. Still at my age, I'm a clinic guy. And I've never been to a clinic when I didn't learn something from somebody just through chatting, or maybe I helped somebody out. But learn as much as you can about the school, the kids. You've got the job, you know that. And then be sure you have a plan. Don't just sort of wing it. Be sure you know what you want to do, and coach what you know and what you've learned along the way.
So, Coach, you've been able to be around the profession for about 58 years now, 45 of which were at Brainerd High School. How are you able to coach so long and thrive for so long when the coaching longevity in our profession today continues to get smaller and smaller?
Well, a couple of things. Maybe this is really helpful. First of all, passion lasts a lifetime. Excitement is temporary. And since a kid, again, growing up in North Minneapolis, I always knew there's somewhere in this office there's some article somewhere that says Stolski always knew I always knew I wanted to be a coach. I love the game. I love the game of football in particular. And I knew I wanted to be a coach. So wherever I went, I brought the passion with me, the desire to be a coach, and not just to win a lot of games, although I guess early on that is paramount, is to interact with kids. And so I think I've been able to, because of that passion, because it's a love of my life. I believe in the values of football. I think it's a great metaphor for life. Few games that I can say, and I played about all of them, coached most of them. But football is the purest metaphor for life. So that passion just carried me. I never wanted to be anything else but a football coach. And so that itself, and that goal and that desire and the love of the game and the love of the kids that played. So it was easy for me to continue on. And then I think the second thing that allowed me to coach as long as I have, and by the way, I intend to find a patch of grass next fall with with the little fifth or sixth graders rolling around and bringing a ball and say, let's coach or let's play. I think I've been very fortunate to have had very good assistant coaches who have bought into our philosophy. We have a philosophy we call the Warrior Way. And if I can backtrack a little, if I were getting any coaching advice, I'd say come up with a theme that defines your program, and don't make it annually. This is what we believe. This is the Warrior Way. This is how we're going to teach. This is how we're going to behave. And eventually it becomes a spirit. So I think the love of the game plus the relationships that I've been able to form over all those times, and then the great assistant coaches that I was lucky to have. And then finally, some of the best people I've ever met in my life are in the coaching profession. You're at Fairmont. Tom Mahoney. When I was a very young coach, Tom Mahoney was a legendary coach at Fairmont, as you know. And he put his arm around me in 1969, and he said, kid, are you going to coach for the rest of your life? And I said, I sure hell hope so. And he gave me some good advice on things. This is what you should do then. You should become a part of the Football Coaches Association. You should do this, you should do that. And back when Tom finally did retire, he shuffled off maybe volumes of things that you guys are looking for, because he gave them all to me. So I think it was a passion. I think love of the game, and then relationships you form, not just with your own staff, by the way, but with coaches across the field from you. I have so many friends and so many games that we played against one another and did our best to come out on top. But more importantly, it was that handshake at the end of it all.
Coach, when you look back at your coaching career, what's the one thing you're most proud of?
Boy, that's really tough, John, because we're proud of a lot of things. I think being an innovator, I think we were ahead of our time in a lot of ways. I think we were willing to change. I'm not going to say that's the thing I'm most proud of, but there were so many coaches along the way that I started with. We were a young fraternity, and you talk about going to clinics and stuff. We would sleep in the car. We would share, bag lunches. There was a whole raft of us, and somehow or other, and not intentionally, just kind of outlasted them. And some of them had very long and storied careers. But along the way, you just learn that you have to adapt and change to the times. You either manage change or it manages you. And I think we're willing to do that. But if you ask me what I'm most proud of, I think I'm most proud of the kids that come back, the families that come back, the legions of kids that played ball for us and their parents, who appreciated our message, who appreciated that we did the best we could for them. We cared a lot about them. And whenever I see a kid today on the street, they'll shake my hand. I maybe not even recognize, they're older. Sometimes, not nearly often enough, you get a chance to be a part of something greater than yourself. And it starts with the belief that we can. And that mantra has been on my wall in the locker room in Brainerd since 1975. And every kid that has ever played for us learns that. And the letters that I get, or the notes that I get, I think it's mostly about, Coach, you really cared about us. So if that's it, that's good enough for me. Plus, we have so many, we've coached so many people in construction, so many in the service, so many in the military, so many doctors, so many lawyers, so many teachers, so many counselors, so many men of the clergy, so many, and that I'm proud of that, because so often they'll get back and say the lessons I learned in football, in Warrior football, carry me. I guess I'm most proud of that.
Now, your coaching resume is certainly one of the greatest in the state of Minnesota, and likely we'll ever see going forward. However, when the record books and historians of Minnesota high school football look back at the legacy of Ron Stolski, what do you want to be remembered for?
He had a passion for the game. He loved those who played it and coached it. He gave it everything he had, and he hopes it was enough. Pages turned, chapters closed, the book not finished.
Coach, to end kind of on a positive and a light note, you have quite the story about your first job in Kensington, Minnesota, that you shared with me when we first had our first phone conversation. So to end on that story, I think it's just a phenomenal story about how you got into coaching. Could you share that first story with our audience?
Well, I will. And I don't mean to offend anybody, but I use a brogue with it. I played at McAllister. I played at Patrick Henry High School and McAllister College, and had great influences along the way. And as I said earlier, I always knew I wanted to be a coach. In 1962, I was applying for my first job in Kensington, Minnesota, which is about 100 and some miles west and south of the Twin Cities, just about 20 miles west of Alexandria. So I'm driving up there. My wife and I had just had our second daughter. I'm in the only suit I ever owned, a powder blue suit that I wore to our junior prom. I got a junker car, and I'm excited as all get out to interview for this job. So I get to Kensington, a town of about 300 maybe, and the main street's 2 blocks long, and at the end of the main street is a beautiful brick building, and it housed the school. Well, the school had 21 kids in the senior class, so you can imagine the size of it. It was a K through 12 school, and the football was 8-man football that I had, frankly, had never even seen before. In any case, I get out of my car, walk into the school. It was late May, and the first person I see is a man dressed up in a nice brown suit and a fedora hat and tie, and I assumed that school was not in session. I assumed that was the superintendent, a man named Elmer Rosted. So I went up to him and I said, Mr. Rosted, and the man looked at me and said, well, hell no. He says, I'm Milford. He says, I'm the maintenance man here, the janitor, you know. But he said, you're looking for Tug, he said. He's right down there at the end of the hall. So I walked down the hall. It was kind of shadowy. There weren't any lights on, and I meet a man, a huge, strong man who had more patches on his pants than I had ever seen, a flannel check shirt, a cigarette in his mouth. And he looked at me and he said, Stolski, he says, you're here for that football position now. I said, well, yes, I am, Mr. Rose said. Well, I said, let's go into my office. And he says, we'll talk about it. So we walked, it was a wood floor, and we walked into this kind of large, spacious office. And I noticed he was walking ahead of me, and I noticed that there was a extension cord bouncing along right behind him off of his waist. And we went into this kind of spacious, imagine old school office. And he sat down, he reached over and plugged himself in, and he says, hemorrhoids. He says, damn, that feels good. And what he had done was tied a heating pad to his backside with a dish towel, and he had hemorrhoids, and he plugged himself into that heating pad. And that was my first meeting with Mr. Rosted. Well, we visited a while about the job. I was going to teach 6 classes, be the head football coach, assistant basketball, have the yearbook, the homecoming, the class play, and be head track coach and teach 6 separate classes. There wasn't a track. We ended up running around the school, but we did win the district because we had some kids. Well, in any event, he said, well, where would you like to see the field installs? I said, I sure would. So we walked out the back door, and all the way up, now I remind you, on Highway 55 West, was going through beautiful towns, Bruton and Belgrade and Annandale earlier and Glenwood, and seeing all the beautiful lighted fields along, close to the highway. So we started walking across this field, and there was a grove of trees about 200 yards out, and I assumed that the field was behind that grove of trees. So we're getting in the middle of the field now. Remember, it's late May, so the weeds are up almost, it's certainly to your waist. And he stopped and he said, well, this is it. And I said, well, this is what? I remember, I'm a kid from the Twin Cities. He said, this is the field. Well, I said, I don't see any goalposts. And he took a drag again of that cigarette and he says, hell, Stolski, he says, we haven't scored here in 5 years. I'm paraphrasing now. That explains no scoreboard. And I said, I looked left and right. I was learned later that you look east and west. And I said, it doesn't look 100 yards long. And he said, well, he says that we never measured. But he says, we cut it in the fall. So, I don't know what to think now. I'm a young kid. I'm 21, something like that. What would I have been? Yeah, 22, going on 23. And anyway, he says, I'd like to take you out to meet the chairman of the board, he says. So I said, all right. We get in his pickup truck and we head towards Cyrus, Minnesota. We get halfway and get out of the truck, and here's a farmer plowing just the deepest, richest black soil you've ever seen. And I was about to learn a little bit about small town politics. So the farmer came our way, got off the tractor, shut her off, and Mr. Rosa, I was learned later to call him Tug. That was his nickname. Tug said to Brainerd Spilsett, the chairman of the board, he said, Brainerd, he says, I want you to meet young Stolski here. He's here for that football position. And Brainerd Spilsett looked at me and a little bit of snuff coming out of the corner of his mouth, and he said, Stolski, he says, what religion are you then? And what I was to learn was that the man who owned the grain elevator was Catholic, and the man who owned the little cafe in town was Catholic. The rest were all Lutherans. Well, I'd been raised Catholic, but when my wife and I decided to marry, I didn't want a double, two different religions of family, so I changed. That was just fine with everybody. So I said, I'm Lutheran. Brainerd Spilsett looked at Tug and looked at me and he says, he looks good enough to be Tug. So that's how I got the job. First year, we had 3 kids come out to the first practice. Three. Now remember, it was 8-man football, so we were 5 short. We ended up with 13. We had 11 at our first game. We played Marietta, Minnesota. I'll never forget that. And only 11 kids showed up because 2 got jobs hanging. I remember every name of every boy on that team. Brainerd Spilsett's boy, David, was our quarterback. Had never played football, but was a great jump shooter in basketball. We lost our first 4 games. And the 5th game was homecoming. And we had a player who had been ill for the first month of the season. He was back. In any case, we won. In 8-man football, this happened sometimes. We won 56-0. We beat Brandon, Minnesota. And by now, of course, we had goal posts because my brother and I had come up in the summertime and built them and put them up. And Tug and I are dancing a jig in the middle of the field. And I hear the sound of a 57 Chevy. And I look over and hear a couple of the farm kids had put heavy ropes on the goalposts and were tearing them down. And I said to Tug, now remember, the whole town's out in the middle of the field, jump up and down, they had one, this and that. And I said, Tug, look what they're doing to our goalposts. Oh, he says, don't worry there, Stolski, we'll have them up again by noon tomorrow. And in the middle of it all, Vern Johnson, who owned the bowling alley, and had 4 alleys, but he had a little lunch counter with 6 stools in it. Vern went wild and said, hamburgers for everybody. In the town of Kensington, and our 13 players walked down Main Street, everybody following him. We all had hamburgers. The sidebar on that is we never lost another game that year or the next. No, we lost one the next year by 1 point. I then moved on. I never wanted to move. I could have stayed in Kensington forever, but I got a phone call. And when I left, there was a lighted field and stadium there. But the most important thing was I learned that Tug Rostad was a great leader. I learned things from Tug. He cared so much about the faculty and the kids there. And Maynard Spilseth and his wife, Agnes, and me and my wife, Sharon, and our 2 little girls over every other Sunday for dinner. It was a great experience for us, and one I'll never forget. And when we won our 300th game in Brainerd here, there was a lot of fireworks and all of that, and out of the mist came 5 of the players that were on that original 1962 team.